Hello and welcome everybody who's joined us for this BIC hosted event at London Book Fair Online today. My name is Karina Urquhart. I'm the Executive Director at BIC, or Book Industry Communication as it's also known, and I'll be your host for this session. The session today is on the topic, as you can see on the slide there, of mitigating risk in the book or content supply chain, and forms part one of the business of books track. Part two is on the sustainability in publishing. That'll be on a little bit later on today. Please do feel free to tweet about this event. The tweet is there on the screen. The hashtag even is on the screen, and do please tag at BIC1UK should you want to be tweeting. So just before we get started, a little bit about BIC. So for those of you who are new to BIC, we are the long established, dedicated supply chain organisation at the heart of the book industry, creating standards, best practices and resources that form part of the DNA of your organisation's supply chains. We help organisations become more efficient, save money, become less wasteful and ultimately, hopefully, greener. You can find out more about us on the or via the link on the screen in front of you. You may want to join our mailing list as well. So there's a join our mailing list on our website as well. So do have a look at that. So in today's session, what's it all about? So we're going to hear today about how the supply chain and the demand shocks of the impact of COVID-19 globally and also locally have been unprecedented and are still very much ongoing, and how they've inevitably given rise to a sharper focus on the supply chain and the future of our industry with regards to the supply chain, and how we need to be looking at future proofing. The need for environmentally respectful supply chains that are agile, responsive and resilient in order to survive not only this pandemic, but future world events, geopolitical events, dare I say it, future pandemics. In fact, just to be able to survive anything that may give rise to further supply and demand shocks has become obvious. Today, we're going to look at lessons learned so far, things to consider for future proofing against future events that I've just talked about, and how technology, people, communications and best practices are all areas that can help improve the resilience of our supply chains, both the physical ones and also the digital ones. So joining me today, I have 4 speakers, and the first one is David Hetherington. David is the Vice President, Global Business Development at Books International. And Books International are a leading provider of US and international manufacturing and distribution services to publishers. David has over 40 years of industry experience, so I'm sure we'll be learning great things from David today. Matthew Hogg, Director of Publisher and Customer Services at Macmillan Distribution, or MDL as they're also known. Matthew has over 25 years experience working in various operational and management roles within the publishing supply chain. MDL distributes globally to a range of customers, including retailers, wholesalers, institutions, and members of the public. And then we will be hearing from Stephen Long. Stephen Long is a freelance consultant and is currently leading BIC's Ordering Best Practice project. Stephen has over 30 years worth of book industry experience, gained again in a variety of operational roles, both at Waterstones and also Nielsen. And last but not least, we have David Marlin. David is president of Metacomet Systems, a royalty management software company. His previous industry experience spans over 20 years and includes working as a technology consultant for publishers such as Random House, Penguin, or Penguin Random House as they're now known, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Scholastic, Time Warner, and many others. So I've worked out between us, I think we have, between all of us here, we have about, I think, over 150 years worth of industry experience. I'm going to hand over now to David Hetherington, who's going to give us an international perspective of the ongoing impacts of COVID on the supply chain. He's going to talk a bit about transport, infrastructure, immediate opportunities and challenges, and managing the situation for today and tomorrow. So over to you, David.
Thank you very much. Okay, first slide, please. Well, first of all, good morning, and I'm delighted to be here, and hopefully I'll be able to share some information with you that you will find of value. Much of what I am about to share with you will probably not come as a surprise, but in any event, let's get started. So point number one is that, there's quite a bit of publicity about what a great year the publishing industry has had, and there's no question that the numbers for many organizations were extraordinarily high, extraordinarily positive. But the question I think that we all have to come to grips with is, what does the future look like? I think it's essential that we try to avoid what we call in America irrational exuberance about the road ahead. I think there is some serious question about what is going to happen in the book publishing market when people have other things to do with their money. Travel is surging. There's a great deal of pent-up capital waiting to be spent, and I think it's probably not going to be spent on books. I think the other thing is that as children go back to school, some of the sectors will rebound. Other sectors that have had a superb year will likely not have such a rich year in 21-22. So I think that everybody needs to keep their eye on the radar screen about what's happening in the space. Several sectors I expect will see some significant changes, and these are likely to be sustained changes. In academic and education, I think the move to distance education, the move particularly in higher ed to institutional access may really have a profound effect on the textbook market. I think in elementary and high school, you will also see a growing interest in what we refer to as OER, or open education resources, which are resources that are royalty-free and produced by subject matter experts, but not through the normal publishing chain. So again, I think it's a time to pay attention, a time to not to make any assumptions that the status quo will continue. Next slide, please. So I've broken today's conversation into really three buckets, the first being distribution, the second being manufacturing, and the third, other considerations. I think all of these pieces have to be viewed in combination, but starting from the left side of the page, I think there's no question that e-commerce has firmly been established as the dominant distribution channel. This is not to say that bricks and mortar is over as we know it, but I think we should expect a different marketplace in the years ahead. I think Barnes & Noble is going through some profound changes because of the change in ownership. I also think that it is fair to say that the bookstores, bricks and mortar institutions will be spending more time and effort on margin and mix. And with the recent acquisition of a paper goods operation by Barnes & Noble, I think that Waterstones and B&N will be spending less time, effort, and space on the traditional books. So pay attention here. Second, publishers are really focusing a great deal of attention on establishing their own direct-to-consumer channel. I think the fact that we all went through what I'll call the Amazon fast early in the pandemic, when Amazon focused its time and efforts and resources on consumer goods and did not emphasize books, created certainly some risks and also some opportunities as new players stepped into the space left by Amazon. But the one thing that's very clear is that publishers are really paying a lot of attention to building their own relationships with their readers. And I think that publishing organizations need to think about where this is going to go and make sure that the supply chain is equipped to handle direct to consumer businesses. I think the third piece about distribution is the permanent change in the place occupied by digital. Unquestionably, digital has grown dramatically in the course of the past 15 months. One statistic I read just the other day suggested that digital's growth in 18 months is the equivalent of what they would have expected in a 10-year period. I think libraries will see fundamental changes in what they purchase, far more investment in digital books, ebooks, than traditional books. Also, as I mentioned earlier, this institutional access in higher education is likely to have a profound impact on the textbook market. On the manufacturing side, certainly in the United States, paper prices are up and availability is down. Much tighter supply as mills take capacity offline and refocus their resources on more profitable lines of business, with corrugated and packaging materials getting a great deal of attention because of the surge in e-commerce. There's also strained manufacturing capacity in the US at least, and we have a manufacturing base that's being rationalized as several acquisitions are being digested and excess capacity is being winnowed out of the market for a variety of reasons. And lastly, I think all of us need to spend a lot more time looking at digital manufacturing and how the value it brings. Offset still has a place for certain products, but I think digital really should be central to your thinking as you move forward, because it gives you the option to support three inventory schemes. The first being classic print on demand, which is sell first and print later. Then there is ASR, or automated stock replenishment, where a publisher sets a modest amount of inventory as a threshold. And once that's breached, the publisher automatically goes back to press. And finally, there's the traditional model, which we at Books International refer to as core, which simply refers to the idea of print first, sell later. But digital can handle all of those options. Unfortunately, I do not believe that offset does the same. Finally, under other considerations, as Karina mentioned a few minutes ago, sustainability and the green supply chain is becoming front and center. You really must pay attention to this for a variety of reasons, not only because it's good for business, but also consumers are making decisions about the products they will buy based on a company's sustainability profile. If your organization is not actively supporting sustainability, the green supply chain, you're increasing your cost and you're reducing the prospect of your product being sold. Right? Freight availability and cost. Freight costs are skyrocketing, whether they are for trucking or for ocean freight. A great deal of capacity has been taken offline. I checked a statistic this morning. When I spoke with my teammates here earlier this week, I thought it had to do with the United States. I was wrong. Okay, this is the statistic. There are positions for 60,000 drivers in the United Kingdom that are open. They need 60,000 drivers. In the course of the pandemic, 30,000 appointments for driver tests were canceled. Right, so there is a crisis afoot here that's hard to fathom, and on top of that, the introduction of Brexit has caused all kinds of problems, as capacity is constrained by what this article referred to as mixed loads. So if you have a load going over to the continent and it's a combination of 5 different shipments from 5 different companies, if the paperwork for one of those 5 is not what it's supposed to be, all 5 shipments get stopped dead in their tracks. So it is a nightmare situation on freight. And again, new demands on fulfillment infrastructure, that harks back to the idea of business to consumer. The point here, and I cannot emphasize this too strongly, is that as an industry, we have had a traditional fixation on unit manufacturing cost. That is not going to help us. As an industry, we need to turn our sights and emphasis on focusing on cash management, focusing on speed, lowering the total cost of ownership, and above all, focusing on flexibility because, as Karina pointed out from that quotation, God knows what the next crisis will be. And I think that's it. I think I've covered all these points, yep. Karina, so we can just...
Great.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Let me just stop sharing the screen.
Well, actually, let me just say two things about this. Number one, okay. I'm a firm believer in the idea of C-level support, right? I think too often supply chain activity has been perhaps less glamorous than the editorial side of things, but now more than ever, it deserves attention. And the other thing I would say is that participating in industry organizations like Book Industry Study Group and BIC, and listening in on webinars like this are really good for you and good for your organizations. And I would heartily encourage you to do both.
Thank you for that, David. Yes, so some very interesting points there, and we've got a few minutes to talk between us about those points that, that David's raised. So I think I'll go first, if that's okay. Unless anyone has a pressing question, I wanted to ask David. I was quite shocked to hear about the 60,000 drivers vacancies in the UK. Do you think that's largely down to COVID, or do you think that that's perhaps there's something else behind that?
No, I think there's probably several factors, but I also think it's probably an aging workforce. The fact that business to consumer activity is ramped up and there's more need for drivers to get the work done. So I think I wouldn't describe it as COVID specific. I'm sure COVID contributed to it, particularly, if the aging workforce was affected by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Karina, I can probably just add to that. I mean,
yeah, please do.
David referenced this, but Brexit has unquestionably had an impact on that workforce as well. So drivers that we had from the continent, we have lost back to the continent. So I think that's an established fact that we're dealing with. And also here in the UK, we've had changes to tax legislation that means that more people are needing to be brought onto permanent payroll. So actually, what we've lost at the worst possible time when we've had those issues with Brexit and the pandemic and the general state of the industry is we've had a lot of people who were used to being self-employed choosing to retire. It sort of leans back to David's point, rather than joining an organisation, they've chosen not to continue to drive, and it's a bit of a perfect storm that we're brewing up there. And I guess the other thing that we're challenged with in transport here in the UK is the difference between running an HGV or doing a multi-drop. So if you're going to do a driving job, you can get a pretty good salary from either. Some are more arduous than others. None of them are easy, frankly, but there are different alternatives for people going into that industry as well. So we don't have the answers today, but we know there's an awful lot of problems there. And what we understand is that that's driving inflation in salaries because there's more competition for the drivers that are out there. So we're looking at double-digit, something close to 10% increase in driver salaries for HGVs. Wow. Because of the availability, which
has its own knock-on effects.
Has its knock-on effects.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I think there's a lot more we could possibly talk about on this, but in the interest of time, I'm afraid I'm going to have to move on. So thank you to David.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So now I'm going to hand over to Matthew Hogg, and Matt is going to talk about MDL's experience of COVID, focusing on technology, people and relationships, and also looking at opportunities for the future and key learnings. So let me just share my screen one more time. There we go. So over to you, Matt.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karina, and hi, everyone. So I guess today is a bit of an interesting brief because we're talking about a pandemic and our learning from it whilst it's still going on. And so I guess one of my early reflections here is that the last 16 months has been an opportunity for an enormous amount of learning throughout our supply chain. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes just talking through some of those experiences. Hopefully they're useful for people, either because they're thoughts they haven't had before, or just because they're similar experiences that people have had as well. So I wanted to start just by talking about technology, because our experience thus far through the pandemic is that the technology that we had in place was actually very supportive of the challenges that we faced. So we'd taken a decision back in around 2014 to to move away from email as being our sort of primary way of communicating with our customers and our publishers. Although they do still use email to contact us, we put some other technologies in place through some task management systems. And what very early on was a huge benefit to us was the visibility that those systems gave us. So we were, like everyone else, moving into working from home environments, being very dispersed and disparate from each other. But at no point did we actually have separation, because we could see everything that was going on with everyone. And so certainly one of our learning experiences that we've taken away from the last year is that having that technology in place and having that visibility is great, because you can manage the business remotely. But also the same technologies are very good at being able to turn things like feedback loops on. So we felt in touch with our customers, even though everyone was very busy and everyone was dealing with the various aspects of the crisis within their own businesses. Because we had the feedback loops switched on, we had sentiment coming back, and we could see very quickly how the business was performing as we adapted from our very long-standing traditional sort of office-based environment to a very rapid work from home environment. So those technologies are good, and I guess my comments there are they are accessible to all sizes of business, so worth looking at those. We did have some issues as well. So certainly one of our other pieces of learning was that we were far too reliant on a physical phone infrastructure. So if we did this again, we wouldn't have gone into a pandemic and a work from home model with hard infrastructure around our phone systems for our contact and call centers. And so that was something that we had to adapt to and move very quickly. But our experience of that has been very positive. We were able to pick things up, shift them across very quickly, and we've been hugely impressed with the level of technology that's available to keep our teams working remotely. Coming back more onto a big theme, of course, EDI was a massive part of everything we do, and it performed very well. And EDI carries the vast majority of the order traffic into Macmillan Distribution for us to service from our warehouse. And what that enables us to do is to utilize our people and our resources to address the other things that need to happen. So again, in reflection, I would say that EDI was more important than ever over the last 16 months, because we really needed our people power to deal with all of the other challenges around the pandemic and all of the other situations we were trying to deal with, and not to be focused in on orders. So Stephen, I'm sure, will talk a little bit more later on about ordering in the supply chain, but it's never really been more important for us. And an observation there was actually we coped a lot better than perhaps we necessarily expected to in those early days. I think if the situation had been different, because we are trying to think forward to what the next possible crisis might be that we have to deal with, and we weren't as fortunate in terms of being able to keep the businesses consistently working, my view would be that those that were engaged with electronic trading and EDI would certainly be in a more robust and safer position than those that were relying on manual intervention from people. So that's something just to sort of reinforce in our minds. Otherwise, just in terms of technology, we benefited from having what I think most businesses now have in terms of collaborative tools. So we use the Google Suite or G Suite of software in our business, and I think they proved their full value to us over the last year. And it's probably fair to say that although we'd been using them for a couple of years prior, we're perhaps now using them much closer to their full potential than we were previously. So I think that's accelerated our understanding of the capability and the benefits of those kind of collaborative tools that we can use. So I certainly feel as an organisation, access to those has been essential. And of course, we're all very used now to video calls. So whether that's Teams or Zoom or Google or whatever it is that people are using, I think everyone's used to that as being part of their working life. But underlying those, things like just group or live chat features have been hugely important to our teams to stay in touch with each other. These are less formal things, but massively important to keep people connected and keep information flowing between people. And those have served us well. So I think longer term, we need to make sure that our technology supports both home and office working. I think like most organisations, Macmillan is still trying to work out now what the right balance of home and office work will be. And we all understand that there are space constraints at home. So technology that works well in the office doesn't necessarily always work well at home. So those are the sorts of things that we need to think about over the coming weeks. And just finally on technology, of course, I think the one clear thing, and I guess this isn't news to anyone, but had all of this happened perhaps 5 or 6 years earlier, I think the outcome would have been dramatically different. I feel it's hard to use the word luck when you're talking about a pandemic and coronavirus. I think we're fortunate in its timing that we had these underlying technologies in place and we started to implement them across our business. Because if I look back at some of the technologies we'd have had 5 or 6 years ago and think of what we would or would not have been able to do, I can't see us having been anywhere near as successful. So I guess that's a reminder to all of us to make sure that we do continue to invest in those technologies moving forward. Moving on to my second point, just around people, and I put a comment down that people are much more resilient and adaptable than you think they might be in a crisis, because on the whole, our experience was very, very positive. You know, the move from office to home work was almost seamless. It went remarkably well. I could almost say shockingly well. That's not fair, because there was a lot of effort made by people to make sure that happened. But it certainly exceeded our expectations and was very reassuring. But of course, whilst we did that, we were relying on our existing team structures and relationships. So I think we demonstrated that we can successfully pick up a functional and performing team and move it from a working environment to a home working environment. What we've not demonstrated yet, certainly within our business, is that we can build a team from scratch in a home working environment. I think those two things are very different, and that's why we're now sort of wrestling with these concepts of how much time needs to be spent working from home, where there's clear convenience and benefits, versus how much time needs to be spent in the office. And the other thing, just to say around the people, is that having the right underlying processes is also essential, because I think the more you can reduce reliance on each other's or other teams to support the requirements of the customer, the greater your chances of success. So if there's too many dependencies, too many requirements to speak to other people, and everyone's working in a remote environment, I think your chances of failure will increase. So it's something we have been doing anyway, but it certainly reinforced our position, empowering people in clearly defined roles based around the workload demands that they have, so that they can, when necessary, work in isolation, is key to actually succeeding in this sort of remote working environment. And you know, the less dependencies, the more successful you'll be. And of course, I think perhaps we've all learned that flexibility is something that we all have to think about moving forward. So we've crossed boundaries, we've moved into places which many of us, certainly in our management team, wouldn't have previously understood as being possible. And we've moved our work and our requirements for an office to people's homes. And of course, that has mutually beneficial outcomes. It's convenient for people and it's convenient for the business. And we've got to continue to maintain that flexibility, I think, moving forward as we devise our longer term policies. And so at MDL, certainly in our commercial teams, there's the opportunity now to crystallize some of those positive aspects of what we've learned into the future. And it would be a shame, having been successful and survived the last 16 months in the way that we have, not to take those points of learning and turn those into sort of longer term positives for us as a business. Just closing off on people now, just one observation that I know something I've shared with Vic previously and I wanted to share today, is that although I've spoken for the last few minutes about how successful we were moving people to a remote working environment from a commercial team, every single day of the pandemic, we had our warehouse team coming into the warehouse, picking and packing and dispatching books. Every day of the pandemic, we had delivery drivers collecting or delivering books and delivering them to our customers. And I guess what that highlighted to me was that absolute dependence on that physical workforce. We can be very clever about our systems, we can be very clever about our processes, but we should be, and I'm sure everyone is, hugely grateful for all of those people who, through very difficult times, especially in the early days of the pandemic, continued to come to work and to continue to keep our supply chain moving. And I know I certainly felt very often sitting at my home office coming up with all my plans that actually we were in a very fragile place. Everything was fine as long as we didn't have a problem in our distribution centre. And we were fortunate, very fortunate, that we didn't. We obviously put mitigation measures in place, but we didn't have full control of that situation. And so perhaps building that resilience in this part of our supply chain is going to be the most challenging. I think we've got a number of answers for our commercial teams. I don't think we necessarily have all of the answers for our warehouse teams, because I don't know, we're hypothesizing today about what the next potential crisis might be, but if it's something of a similar nature, I think we're always going to have a potential weakness around that physical part of our supply chain. And then just to close off, just in terms of the points that I wanted to raise today, my final point really was just around relationships. So our supply chain is highly geared and highly leveraged on a good day, on a normal day. We've not had one of those recently, but it's hard work most of the time. So on a bad day, those weaknesses can be very quickly exposed. And in 2020 and through 2021, there's no question that workload demands were excessive and at times pretty unreasonable for us. And it was always our view from day one, looking at what was going on, that if possible, it was essential to try and keep everything moving. We talk a lot in BIC and in the industry about the supply chain, and we don't have time to go through all the links today, but what seemed very key was that as long as we kept everything moving, we could keep cash moving. And if we could keep cash moving, we could potentially find a way of helping everyone through a very uncertain and undetermined sort of crisis period of time. And that was often at odds with what people were expecting. So we won't dig into detail there, but it meant that we had to make decisions. It meant that we had to be robust in our expectations, both of our publishers, ourselves, and our customers. And that meant we had to do a lot more talking to each other, perhaps more than we were used to doing. And so communication had to pick up. So we had to be much more frequent in our communication. We had to be much more open in that communication. And we had to be really bluntly honest at all times. I mean, one of the advantages of the situation we found ourselves in was that it was a complete unknown for everyone. And so it was okay not to always have the answers. Sometimes people want to have the sort of very polished communications which tell everyone everything they want to hear and know. But certainly coronavirus didn't give us the opportunity to do that. But by sharing our plans, by sharing our thoughts, just by being open about what our successes and our losses were or failures were in terms of where the business was going, we managed to get everyone around us engaged, and it was really a huge success that everyone worked together to keep everything moving. And so, from my point of view, COVID has helped us to think differently in many ways and better recognise the strengths of our existing supply chain, and it has delivered for us very well.
There was something else as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk to any of these points. Please do just speak up if you do. Just wanted to ask, we talked a little while, I think it was last week, about simplifying processes and looking at stress points, pressure points in the supply chain, and do we understand where they are? We hear a lot in businesses, don't we, about mapping their processes, simplifying processes, but as well as understanding the process, do we understand the stress points? Do we understand our suppliers' stress points, etc., etc.?
Yes, I think there's a couple of questions in there, Karina. I think I'll take the easy one first. I think perhaps we don't have or didn't have a full understanding of our suppliers' stress points, and it's certainly an area of focus now for us to think more about the businesses that support us and are around us to make sure these things work. It's back to that chain, isn't it? We can only successfully distribute books if people can produce books and print books and deliver books. So the whole thing has to flow. And I guess we're guilty sometimes of being slightly siloed in terms of managing our business without looking at the full end-to-end chain or supply chain, which is where organisations like BIC and BISG come in, because it helps to highlight those things. And I guess, like many of our sort of fellow organisations in our supply chain, the other thing is, there's a lot of legacy businesses, there's a lot of established businesses there, and we understood, and we were fortunate to have been doing this before. But reviewing those processes, understanding the pinch points, making those more streamlined, reducing your dependencies, all those things I slightly rushed through in the time that we've got today, they unquestionably paid off for us over the last 12 months, because we had simplified processes which are designed to do exactly what you need to do, and they're not encumbered by a legacy process or a legacy system, really. So it's the less links in the chain, the better. The more chance you have to succeed, and the less parts of a process, the more chance to succeed. But that's not to say by any means that all of our processes are perfect. There's always more you can do. You can spend your life reviewing and revising processes, because I think as David H has already said, the industry around us is constantly changing, and we have to adapt to that.
Yeah. So thank you to Matt for sharing his insights there with MDL's observations, findings, experiences, well, ongoing as well experiences through the pandemic. Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over to David Marlin now. David's going to share his thoughts and experiences with regards to mitigating risk in the back office parts of the supply chain, so areas such as sales data, royalties, author relationships. He's going to be looking specifically at technology, automation, leveraging standards and best practices. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Karina. Yeah, I think this slide that's up, I think this would be best be shown towards the end of what I'm going to say. So maybe if you don't mind, just there you go. Thank you. Yeah, I think building a lot on what Matt was talking about, and Stephen and David even, you know, the one really interesting observation I've noticed over these last 15 months or so is the speed with which publishers have, I think, caught up to many other industries. You know, a lot of people talk about how publishing is a little behind technologically many other media industries, and I think it's been very interesting to see publishers embrace and adopt technology that's made them more efficient, and I think it's very encouraging for the future. So, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the back office risks and mitigating those risks. And I think to start that, I just, you know, I remember early on in my career, I asked one of my early customers. So I've been doing royalty systems. I've been in the industry for 23 years now, and I've been doing royalties for probably 20 of those years. And early in my career, I asked one of my customers, you know, what's the most important thing for your business? What is your, you know, what is your number one focus? And she responded to me immediately, my authors. And as I've been hearing that, you know, asking that question to other publishers, I regularly hear the same thing, that the author relationship is a critical component of their business. And if you think about it, the whole process of selling books begins with the content created by the author. So in some ways, the whole supply chain starts with that content creation process, and finding and competing for those good authors is tough. Authors have options, and especially if a publisher has nurtured them, that publisher's relationship with the author is critical to make sure that they sign on for that second piece. And so I'm going to talk about a few different things with back office, but royalty management is a real critical component of that back office piece and those back office risks. And because of the importance of the author relationship, royalty management is a critical piece of publishing, because if you don't do royalties well, you risk losing the trust of your authors. You risk developing a negative reputation, so other authors don't want to sign with you. You risk the distraction and embarrassment of underpaying or overpaying authors. And we've seen all of these situations. They're all challenging situations. You risk legal action, and of course, you know, you risk wasting valuable resources by just being extremely inefficient. You know, so in addition to royalties, many other parts of the back office represent risk. You know, your accounting processes, your billing processes, you know, your HR processes. And COVID certainly pretty substantially compounded this risk. Publishers have had to do a lot more with a lot less over the last year and change. And you know, already so many publishers were putting way too much effort into their royalties and into some of these other back office operations. And now these same people who are managing these back office operations were suddenly given a tremendous amount more work as staffs shrunk, and that greatly increases the risk. You know, all these risks of royalties and other aspects of the back office operation. But you know, like I mentioned earlier, and I think as Matt talked to a lot, like so much of COVID one silver lining that we saw tremendously is publishers putting a very strong focus into efficiencies. And in my 23 years in the industry, I've never seen such a concerted effort by publishers to optimize their back office operations. And usually, you know, that made them so much, you know, by doing that, it made them so much more efficient. And it also took a huge amount of stress out of the back office. You know, it's a lot of the, you know, there's a lot of concerns about efficiency and about uncertainty and about making mistakes. And by introducing efficiencies and processes, as Matt talked about, and technology to support those processes, really, in some ways, technology can drive those processes, can force you into certain best practices. So if you don't mind putting that slide up, Karina, now, you know, I can talk about so when it great, thank you. So you know, looking at the royalty piece, when it comes to mitigating risk, you know, there's really 4 parts of royalty management, and the keys to mitigating risk are, you know, up in that top left, we call it the acquisition phase. When it comes to royalties, it's accurately recording your contracts and recording those contract details as data. The next part of managing your risk in the back office, especially again where it relies on, where it comes to royalties, is managing your sales data. There's a lot of challenges associated with managing sales data. It's an area that's ripe for error, and so that's a critical component. Another piece to mitigating your risk in the back office is having reporting, which enables you to do the thorough audits that you need to give you the confidence that everything's coming out correctly. And ideally, you know, an audit, a lot of people, you know, kind of freeze up when they hear the idea of doing an audit, but an audit should be easy to do accurately. And so having really good reporting from your back office systems can give you that confidence that you are doing things correctly and help mitigate risk. And it also provides very important business intelligence. You know, like managing all your sales data, understanding your performance, understanding the cost sides of your books. And then finally reporting your results to the authors and you know, their royalty results and the corresponding payments. You know, and one thing I'd like to say, being a BIC member, and all of us being involved in BIC, is there are certain things that the industry can do to make the process smoother for everyone. You know, one of the things that BIC works on is the EditX sales standard, for example. And you know, if we could get the industry to adopt this sales standard, that would eliminate a huge chunk of the sales risk. You know, if we could standardize the way that retailers are reporting their sales data to back to publishers. You know, the whole trick with standards is adoptions. But this is an area where you know, I think it would really benefit the publishing industry to adopt some of these other standards that organizations like BIC have developed, and again, like this sales standard. But you know, whether we adopt these standards or not, the best way to address back office risks, whether it's royalties, other accounting functions, is to have reliable, efficient automation systems in place for that. And you know, and again, that's what we really saw during the pandemic is publishers at a level I've never seen before, making efforts to automate their back office operations with technology, and again to Matt's point, with process. So by using the combination of technology and process to make them so much more efficient and take a lot of the risk out of that you know, that part of their operations.
Great. Have you finished?
I'm done.
Just
yeah.
checking.
Thanks,
I'm just checking.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't want
Thank
to talk if you were you know, thinking about what to say next. So thank you for that. Interesting, your last point there about automation. I was just going to say, oh yes, absolutely, automation standards all the way. But I would say that I'm BIC, so I work at BIC. So, but yes, but I mean, absolutely. If you can, and again, as you know, I think both you and Matt have both said that the industry over the last 15, 16 months has had to do more with less. So people are doing, you know, there's less people to do the same amount of work. And automation and standards are obviously a solution. But what I just wanted to make the point was, yes, absolutely automation, but with knowledge. I worry about the future where we've, you know, if we're automating quite a few processes, that knowledge of the process doesn't get lost once it becomes automated. So I think it's really important, and it was something mentioned earlier as well about an aging workforce, is that we need to make sure that the knowledge stays within the business when that aging workforce retires, or if, you know, people leave, change jobs, whatever. It's what can we do to harness that knowledge before it sort of walks out of the building, as it were.
That's such an interesting point, Karina, and you know, you can make the argument, and I think that there's a very strong argument to be made that technology is critical for ensuring the continuity of processes. We've dealt with many organizations that, you know, they had one person who knew how to do royalties, for example, in the office, or two people who knew how to do royalties or really thoroughly understood it, or, you know, one person who knows how the accounts payable is handled. But if you have formal processes in place that are supported by technology, that the institutional knowledge moves from the individual to the process and the technology, and so it becomes much safer. Yes. To have staff turnover and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and keeping those processes updated and current as well, so that you don't end up just left with the technology doing all the work, but the knowledge behind it has disappeared. Yeah. Okay. Did anybody else want to talk to any of the points that David has mentioned today?
I was just going to add to the point you just made there, Karina. I think my experience, having been in this supply chain for a long time with lots of complex processes, we've had lots of good people over the years who've known lots of complex processes, but not necessarily why they do them, but they can do them expertly. I guess what I'm advocating is to have people in the organisation, which is to your point, who understand their processes, but most important is that they understand what their role is in the organisation, they understand the purpose of it, and they understand how they contribute to the overall success of the business. And I think if we can keep bringing it, process is great, systems are great, people are essential. Yeah. And so if we have the right quality of people around both those technology and processes, then your concern about the longevity of knowledge and success, I think hopefully is covered.
Great. Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Now we're going to hand over to Stephen. Let me just bring up the next slide. So thank you to David for that. So handing over to Stephen. So this is a way of pulling all the strands together, I guess, that we've just been talking about. Stephen's going to talk about a practical piece of work and bring us up to date with the BIC Ordering Best Practice project, which is a bit of a tongue twister. So I'm going to hand, in the interest of time, I'm just going to hand straight over to you, Stephen, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks, Karina, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to start with a quote, if I may. So, in a recent Harvard Business Review article, I spotted the following: there is no sense in automating a process that doesn't work. Process improvement or re-engineering must come first. And I think that echoes some of what we've heard from my fellow speakers this morning. We're having to do more with less. Automation frees up time, but also ensures speed and accuracy. We can't afford to be making basic mistakes and then having to go back and unpick them. We need to be customer focused. Our work colleagues need to be engaged and understand that they're adding value and having an impact. And it goes without saying, every sale matters. And like any utility, the book supply chain gets taken for granted, although everyone expects it to work and work properly 24/7. So as the UK book industry's supply chain organisation, BIC is here to make the supply chain more efficient. And it does that by encouraging us all to adopt recognised standards and best practice. And it's well placed to understand the issues that are challenging the industry at the moment. In the last 16 months, we've seen the supply chain well and truly turned on its head by the COVID pandemic. Ways of working, consumer behaviours that were once so predictable, so constant, have gone out the window. But why is that? Well, you know, part of it is the fact that we work in an industry where humans, our work colleagues, are the links between the automated parts of our supply chain. And recent lockdowns have just shown how prone that supply chain is to disruption. Just to give you a few examples, these immediately spring to mind. Online retailers can prioritise household essentials over books. Physical stores may not have an online presence. Not everyone has access to a smartphone, a tablet or a computer. Not everyone is confident using technology today. Big issue is some of the technology in our industry is old, it's non-standard. And everyone takes it for granted that we all know how our supply chain hangs together and the fact that it's made up of many interlinking supply chains. So we've had to reconsider what we do, how we do it, and adapt, whilst not forgetting that we're here for one thing and one thing only, which is to put books into the hands of consumers as quickly and efficiently as possible. And after all, what would be a supply chain if we can't get the right books to the right place at the right time? And I say this because over the last few years, the BIC membership has flagged up ordering as a cause for concern. And when I say ordering, we're talking about physical books in the business-to-business supply chain here. And if it's affecting the BIC membership, it's going to be affecting the wider industry. So we need a healthy, diverse and robust supply chain with multiple routes to market that can flex when there's disruption, rather than, you know, initially grind to a halt as it did in early 2020. And BIC does have a role to play in this. So earlier this year, Karina asked me to lead a project with representatives from retailers, libraries, distributors, publishers, data aggregators and system providers to look at ordering issues and try and address them, those issues. The list is long, but let me give you a flavour of what we're intending to look at, what we're intending to address. Accuracy and speed of overall ordering processes, order visibility and self-service capabilities, metadata accuracy and completeness, extending the use of online trading platforms, process and message standardization, order cancellations and unnecessary returns, the volume of order-related queries, consistent use of order acknowledgement and action codes, and the role of real-time data. And I think, Karina, that list is neatly summarised on the next slide. Thanks. So in terms of how we're going to go about addressing these issues, we've split the overall project down into 3 areas: discovery and ordering, order tracking and visibility, and order receipting and follow-up. And each of the project members is focusing on a particular area based on their experience and expertise. And it's clear that there are some clear themes emerging. It isn't just about technology and automation. We also need to consider the overall quality of metadata, colleague behaviours, and how we all deal with change, how we pass on our insights and expertise to the next generation of supply chain professionals, how we make use of existing standards, making our supply chain even more sustainable. And, you know, this one's quite strange, but maybe the most simplest in terms of needs, but maybe one of the more challenging items. We need to speed up the receipting process, how we receive books into warehouses, into bookstores, because the sooner we can receive the books, the sooner we can merchandise the books, the sooner we can sell the books. And that's key to our industry. And Karina, if you just move to the next slide. I'd just like to end on another quote from Harvard. If you're in any doubt about why ordering matters, this Harvard Business Review quote is quite blunt in its assessment. Only 1 in 5 US consumers say that they are forgiving retailers and brands for service disruptions due to COVID. The pandemic is no longer a reasonable excuse for not delivering orders on time. And I think that's quite telling. Karina.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Let me just get, that's it. Okay, thank you. So yes, ending on a sobering note there. I think it is fair to say that you know, the onset of the pandemic, it was quite a forgiving environment that we were all operating in, and now perhaps, well, certainly from a consumer perspective, not so much. I think perhaps the I don't want to say the word novelty, but the unusualness of the pandemic has perhaps worn off a little bit in terms of expectations of deliveries, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Did anyone else have anything they wanted to say about the ordering project, or any observations or comments? Stephen, what would you say the engagement was like with that project so far?
So far, so good. I think what I underestimated, I don't know about Matt, who's also on the project, is the number of potential issues in play. That if we had an infinite amount of time, we could go on and on addressing issues. I was taken aback by the number of issues, the permutations, the different nuances in the issues that came up. But most surprisingly, it seems such a straightforward, quick win. I know that's being very simplistic, but receipting issues seem to come up again and again. That the receiving of books, the booking in of stock on EPOS systems is the area that's slowing things down.
Oh, he's muted. You're muted, Matt, I think.
I'm muted in two different places. That was going to happen. It's been over 40 minutes. Sorry, I was just saying, Stephen knows this already because he's alluded to, I'm already part of that discussion. But just coming back to a previous point, you know, part of this session was thinking about how to make ourselves more robust for future unknowns, which is a slightly negative thing. I know there's actually a lot of positive here today, but you know, if EDI can carry 90% of our order traffic uninhibited through these things when we have people-related issues, I think we're already pretty robust, and you know, we have a good, strong foundation there to build on. For me, one of the interesting points in Stephen's projects at the moment is the visibility side, because actually a lot of what we spent our time doing was communicating order status, general visibility of stuff within the supply chain, which I personally see as, you know, it's available in places, but it's not strong enough to support a perhaps more profound disruption to people within our supply chain. So that's quite an interesting strand, I think, for us to pick up.
So Matt, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I suppose the question is, do we need more standards? Do we need more trading platforms, or is it more a question of the messaging to the trade and more encouragement to use what's already out there and use it to better effect?
Yeah, I think, as you say, Stephen, there are standards, there are systems, and I think the standards are there, and probably we don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think the systems we have are probably underutilized and not complete.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that point, I've been involved in a lot of standards creation, and there are several good standards for many things out there that have been created in our industry that, you know, the unfortunately the issue with a lot of these standards is adoption. But there are things out there that if we could get the industry to more widely adopt, like we talked about the edX sales report, things like that could certainly make the chain much more efficient and thereby taking a lot of the risk out of it too.
But therein lies another challenge, isn't it? In moving from maybe a non-standard legacy approach, you're potentially causing more disruption. And maybe that's the thing, isn't it? After the last 16 months,
yep.
Certainly at this point, who wants more disruption?
You know, that's such a good point. I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
No, that's quite right. But, you know, having had a bit of time in the character building business of software for publishers, what I will say is that the quest for the perfect always gets in the way. And I think that it becomes expensive, time consuming, and inevitably you have a large portion of the population that's not satisfied. Right now, you know, we need to move quickly, and I think make use of the tools we have rather than invent new ones. I think that's the point that Matt was making, and I would agree wholeheartedly with that.
So you mentioned moving quickly, David. On that note, we are over time, so I'm going to say thank you so much to Stephen as well for contributing today and for sharing information about the big ordering project. As a way of closing, then I'm going to quickly ask each of you to give one thing, just one thing, that the attendees today can focus on as a takeaway. So it might be advice or it might be a positive, one or the other. So I'm going to start with David H. David Hetherington.
Yeah, I think what I would say is that despite the challenges, there are immense opportunities here for those who move quickly and have an open mind. And I would urge you to look at your business from that perspective.
Thank
the glass
you.
is definitely half full, not half empty.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Absolutely. I'm hearing a lot of positives here today. So Matt.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo what David just said. I think overwhelmingly, despite the situation, I can think of more positives than negatives out of the last 16 months. And so I think we should, as I said earlier, try and crystallize all of that positive learning and thinking, and just, you know, it's enabled us to think differently. And I don't know how we lock that in, but I think if we can continue to think differently and in an uninhibited way about what could be possible, that's going to drive that innovation and that change. So the more momentum we can get behind this now, the better.
Great. David M.
Yeah, I think I think one real big positive of this is seeing the adoption of by publishers of more back office technologies to make them more efficient and reaching a level of efficiency that will help them succeed and to some degree future-proof them and result in additional positive ROI, which in itself reduces risk. And I think the other positive is we've seen, you know, dealing with royalties every day, we're seeing very creative new business models popping up that publishers are adopting to get their content out there. And I think that's exciting as well.
Great. Thank you. And Stephen.
Gosh, I would say where possible, move to firm sale on books. It would improve our sustainability credentials and it would remove thankless tasks and high costs from our supply chain.
Okay, thank you. And for me, it's from what I've heard today, it's all about people in terms of relationships. Don't underestimate them. Change for improvement, and in there I include looking at processes, innovations, etc., etc. Technology, using technology for efficiency, but also standards and best practices, which is where BIC and the likes of BISG, but Canada, etc., come in. And I've already mentioned it, but innovation, and not just in terms of products or technology, but innovation in terms of ways of thinking as well. I think the last 16 months has shown that our industry especially is remarkable at how well it can think differently and turn things around. So I think that, you know, the message there really is more of the same, please. So I think, you know, seeing the last 15-16 months as an opportunity is a really positive note to end this session on. So that just leaves me to say very quickly, apologies to the technical guys here because we have run over. And just if I can just bring up the last slide here very quickly, just as a more formal thank you, to say that, you know, we're at the end of our session today, and I hope that those of you attending have found it informative, useful, insightful, and that you've managed to gather information, takeaways, inspiration as well, hopefully, to take back for yourself and for your own organisations as well. I'd like to thank our speakers today. So that would be David Hetherington, Matt Hogg, David Marlin and Stephen Long, for not only for today, but also for the preparation that you've put into the session beforehand as well. And finally, I'd like to thank London Book Fair for inviting us to speak today. The slides will be available on the BIC website shortly, as usual. And the recording, when we receive it from London Book Fair as well, will be shared on the BIC YouTube channel. Sign up to our mailing list to stay in touch with everything we're doing in terms of, you know, projects, accreditation, training, events. The list goes on and on of all the things that we're up to. The link's there for you to join if you want, and I hope to see you at another BIC event very soon. Until then, stay safe, take care, and bye for now.